Welcome to the Sunshine Gardening Podcast, your ultimate source for gardening tips and tricks. I'm Kristin Hildabrand, your host. In today's episode, which is episode 32, we will explore the world of pest control, focusing on those pesky creatures that can ruin your home lawn. Dr. Matthew Springer, UK Assistant Extension Professor of Wildlife Management, is joining us. From moles to voles and everything in between, we'll discuss practical ways to control these pests and keep your home lawn healthy. If you're dealing with unwelcome visitors to your home lawn, tune in to get expert advice on managing these creatures. So, put on your gardening gloves and let's dive into the secrets of controlling moles and other unwanted visitors to your lawn. Let's get started.
Welcome to the Sunshine Gardening Podcast. This gardening show will equip and inspire avid gardeners with tips and tricks to help them navigate the gardening world. The show will also highlight specific growing requirements for seasonal plants, so the sun will shine brighter over their Kentucky garden. And now, here's that ray of sunshine, garden enthusiast and horticulture extension agent, Kristin Hildabrand, with the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Service.
Welcome back to the Sunshine Gardening Podcast, and joining with us today is Dr. Matt Springer. Hello, Dr. Springer. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Doing well. I'm so glad to have you on the podcast with us today because we are talking about something that we get a lot of questions about, and I'm sure you do as well. But it seems like with the spring and the summer now, with it being the month of May, a lot of people are more active around their lawns, doing different gardening activities and performing lawn maintenance practices. And so it seems like there's some common lawn pests that we do get a lot of questions about. And specifically, we're going to talk about those today. But just to kind of get our conversation going today, what initially interested you in studying wildlife management? You might want to share some of your background with us.
Sure. So I'm originally from Pennsylvania, and I grew up in a family that was very outdoorsy and hunting, fishing, and those kind of things. And I was not very good at organic chemistry my freshman year, so the pre-med track went out the window. And I took a environmental science class, and my dad has a forestry degree, and I'd kind of been exposed to that stuff. And I really enjoyed it and had always kind of been attracted to the idea of managing wildlife populations, mostly in deer. And that's what I did all of my graduate work on. But one of the cool things about the position that I'm currently in and general wildlife management is I never know what kind of problems I'll deal with on a regular day. You know, come in, answer an email, answer a phone call, and all of a sudden I'm working on voles, moles, right? Like we are today. Or I could be dealing with bears or black vultures or who knows. And I think the idea of kind of blending the science component and the structure, trying to understand how these populations are interacting with their environment, how they interact with humans is really cool to me, as well as the part about trying to make that interaction from the human wildlife standpoint more positive because of the benefits that it provides us as humans in terms of economics and nutrition from the gardening perspective and production perspective, as well as if we can make that interaction, then the conservation of those species becomes a little bit more appealing to certain folks, as long as there's not, always a negative connotation with the idea of having animals around your house and garden. That makes life a little bit easier to make sure that we have these resources into the future.
Yes, and you do a great job with all the things that I have questions related to. And I know, like you mentioned there, from eastern Kentucky to western Kentucky to south central Kentucky, or the central part of the state anyway, it can be very, very different across the different locations.
Yeah, we have problems that are definitely regionally specific, right? So you personally have been spared of bear problems for the most part. However, that may change in the future. But the new one that I think we may touch on today are things like armadillos that we never had to deal with before, that I'm safe mostly from in northern Kentucky for the time being. But you definitely now have to worry about them. And that diversity that the state of Kentucky provides is really a wonderful resource and also a headache at the same time.
Yes, it's so funny that you brought up the armadillo because one of my friends from Todd County, they had posted a video, and evidently the dog had scared the armadillo. And it was trying to dig close to the foundation of their house. So that is definitely something new that I don't believe that we have ever seen before.
Yeah, if you're from the South, especially as you get closer and closer to Texas, it's normal to see them, right? They've been around there for a long time, but definitely in the last decade or two, they are in Kentucky. And the further west you go in Kentucky, as you get out to LBL there, and even further towards the river, they're just there. They have been there for a while now, and they are presenting new problems and new concerns, as well as a sometimes very entertaining critter to watch, as long as they're not being destructive.
Yes, yes. Well, they've eaten some of our dog food off the back porch. So, and I guess that's what they were trying to find food. So it is definitely something that we're definitely going to have to monitor. I'm looking forward to what else you have to share about armadillos a little bit later. But to get back to our original conversation, can you help us understand a little bit more the differences between moles? It seems like they are the ones that seem to get the bad rap, but then there could be other culprits within the lawn like voles and like you mentioned there with armadillo and other common lawn pests.
Yeah, so I would put moles in moles with an M, in a very unique kind of problem child, let's call it, as they're mostly disliked not because of what they're eating, but because of how they move around. They're a fossorial mammal, so they live basically underground all the time. And in order to do that, they dig tunnels and push dirt up to make those tunnels. So often what you see is damage to your lawn or landscaping associated with dirt being moved around, pushed up, which sometimes causes the plants to die, because the roots are disturbed enough or damaged. That grass will die. You often get this little lump in the ground where if you run over with a lawnmower, it doesn't make things as visually appealing anymore, and the blades hit dirt and all those kind of things. They're real challenges, and they're mostly just consuming grubs and worms and those kind of things. Whereas our other group of problem children, per se, are things like voles with a V, which are closely related to mice, with basically you can think of those mice without a tail. And they're actual consumers of vegetation and can get in very high densities and create colonies within lawns and landscaping. And they often are digging holes. Other culprits that do that in similar ways, in slightly larger ways, are things like chipmunks. And we also see damage from skunks who create holes, smaller holes, as they're actually digging up and looking for grubs similar to the moles. But they're kind of all, I would say, moles are dealt with very differently than voles and chipmunks. And then skunks, because of their size and some other concerns, are dealt with in a different way as well. And armadillos are now getting lumped in with those skunks. So there's lots of options to cause you headaches if you really, really want to make sure that you have a nice lawn.
Yes. So the lawn, as far as the moles go, is that generally more of an issue at like, say, spring and maybe in the fall, or do you still get some questions about it in the summer versus like, say, skunk? I mean, is skunk more of an issue in a certain season of the year here in Kentucky?
Well, I would say almost all of them decline in the winter, right? For multiple reasons, mostly things like voles and skunks. And moles and chipmunks are hibernating or not very active, in addition to the fact that humans are not out actively on their gardens and lawns aren't really growing. So it's not easy to see the difference between live, very vibrant green grass and the grass that is sitting on a mole tunnel that's dying. So basically, I would say that from the start of growing season in March, in many cases, all the way through until mid to late fall, we have a pretty good number of problems throughout that entire time. Seems like there's a burst of activity in the spring as most of those animals are coming out of hibernation, things like chipmunks and the skunks, and actively looking to build up their fat supplies again and get their health back up and their metabolisms going. So they're going to be looking for a lot more food and consuming a lot more food, as well as you have the burst of new population growth. All right. So they're all having babies and they have to take care of those, and you have new mouths to feed and those kind of things. So you have a lot more metabolic need, is like we would say, right? Nutritional need to meet. So therefore you may have to consume a lot more food. And unfortunately, from the gardening perspective or landscaping perspective, whenever you have new growth coming up on flowers or vegetables, or you transplanted a new plant into an area, that's like a dinner bell going off for most of those animals, and they're going to come and target that. And you're going to try to take good care of what you just put into the ground. And all of a sudden, you'll notice the problems that come from those select group of problem children, right?
Yes. Well, and that's interesting that you said that the need for the nutritional value, because say for us here in Warren County, we're number one in fruit, nut, and berry. And so we have a lot of fruit trees that go into the ground, even perennial fruits. And so I thought maybe the voles could be active during the winter months, but like you said, I think that makes more sense now that you've kind of discussed that.
So you found the exception. I was more thinking lawns landscaping. You brought up, so the voles, though they're less active, they're not true hibernators. Like say chipmunks and skunks will be. I mean, skunks are not really hibernators either. They'll reduce their activity levels if it's really cold. But chipmunks, groundhogs, bears, bats, those kind of things are the ones that we think of as hibernating or going into torpor. Voles activity levels will decrease and increase. They are still looking for food, especially if we have a warm-up period. And since they're looking for new green growth, and that doesn't happen in January and February, a lot of our fruit producers have concerns about voles is because one of the ways they'll meet their nutritional needs in the winter is they'll girdle the roots of those trees to get at that nutrition that's in those roots or at the base of the trees. Rabbits will do it as well, and that will potentially kill the tree. So that's a very different issue. And you can there's a good management strategy that they're aware of that I don't think we necessarily need to go into for lawn and landscaping because it's not a good one, but they have some more options from the restricted use pesticide side of things to help limit those populations that gets done right before winter and knocks them way back so that the number of mouse to feed is way below the amount of food that we want them to consume instead of the trees.
True. And, I think for homeowners that do have fruit trees, they may have some mulch that kind of make that perfect habitat for voles that could be an issue.
Yeah, so when you only have one or two trees, there's some options in terms of how you plant that tree, and you can actually put a rock barrier around those roots that they can't then access those roots because of they're semi-fossorial and often will, and especially in the wintertime, do not want to come above ground because of temperature concerns. So if they don't have that soil substrate to get to those roots in the base of the tree, they are fairly protected from those issues. So there are options that you can look at in terms of planting ahead of time and making sure you kind of build that exclusion wall with about 1 or 2 inches of gravel instead of, say, mulch or substrate right next to that tree.
I love it. So I'm going to get us back on track, I promise. I know that I have you to talk specifically about lawns, and so I will make sure that we get back to there. But in your experience, what are some of the most effective ways to control the moles in the lawn? I know you talked about exclusion there, but what are some options that homeowners have for moles in their yard?
Well, let's talk a little bit about mole in terms of their natural history and kind of frame things so that folks understand. They are a relatively solitary species. The only time that they actually get along with each other is when they're trying to make more of them for the next generation, or mom is raising those young. Outside of that, they tend to have a home range that's about a quarter-ish acre in size that they'll defend from other moles. They will use that entire area, but generally they don't do so at one time. They will focus most of their activity in one specific location. Then over time, they'll kind of move around to cover that entire area. So when dealing with moles, you have to kind of realize that and figure out where that high density activity area is and start doing your management strategies there. So we often talk about, okay, you have a bunch of mole tunneling going on. You can see it all over your yard. They're probably trying to figure out where they want to be. And once you find that, you're not going to see as many new tunnels pop up, but you want to figure out where they actually are in those tunnels. So you walk around and you step on them and knock them back down, and you look for where they're popping back up the next day, because the moles actually do spend a lot of time maintaining those tunnels because it takes a lot of effort to build them, and they want to continue to use them as if they're not disturbed because it costs less energy to do that. So they'll actually fix tunnels pretty rapidly, similar to like a beaver fixing a dam. So as soon as you figure out where that tunnel gets pushed back up, that's where that mole is at that time. And that's where you want to focus your activities. Preventive wise, to avoid moles getting in places you don't want to, you can try to put some screening in the ground, say around lawn beds or garden beds, where you dig down about 12 inches. You can put hardware cloth there and bend it slightly out to prevent them from being able to tunnel into those areas. That's pretty time consuming energetically and can be costly if you're trying to defend a large area, say your entire lawn, right? So it may be quicker or less expensive and a little bit more time friendly to try to proactively, when you find a mole tunnel, go out there and treat it as soon as possible to get rid of them on the quick front end rather than try to prevent them entirely across a large area. And often when we talk about proactively treating them, there's two real methods that we want used. You can either try to trap them with various traps that exist. Most of them are rather gruesome, to be honest, in terms of things like the harpoon trap. And the name kind of tells you why they're a little gruesome. There's also the scissor trap. Guess what that does? There are not necessarily pleasant ways. They are humane because they provide a very quick death to the animal, which is what we want to do. But they're also very difficult for most homeowners who don't have a lot of experience setting them to be effective at. They're $30 to $50 a trap. They will last multiple uses, but in terms of a potential user-friendly option, there are a rodenticide bait that exists that looks like a worm that's sold at most garden stores or box stores called talparid. And you can basically take them and you push them into the tunnels where they're active, and the mole consumes it as a bait and then dies within the tunnel. And relatively cheap and easy to use. And one of the few rodenticides that, in terms of wildlife conservation, is probably the effective tool with no risk, because those moles, being fossorial, do not make themselves available for consumption by a predator above ground. Like if you treated with rodenticide for like the mole or mouse baits, where they consume the anticoagulant, and then like the last day before they pass away, brain's not functioning correctly and they start running around in the open, and often a hawk or a predator will pick them up, and that works its way into their system as well.
That's interesting that you described that there. And I know, too, even for the traps, we do get questions about what if I have, say, a outdoor pet like a dog or a cat? That kind of has concern for some homeowners that I talk to.
Yeah, and as I mentioned about the gruesome nature of those traps, if you have a pet and you want to use those traps, you definitely want to make sure those pets are nowhere near those traps. Their injury, or kids, especially kids, youth, injury can come quite quickly if things are messing with those traps. And it is not something to be taken lightly, for sure, which is why often recommend the talparid bait as a more efficient and safe option.
Yes. And so those baits, the talparid product that you just mentioned, those are fairly easy to get a hold of in most like stores.
Currently they are, yeah. You can pretty much any box store, the big box stores, or any of the, agricultural based stores will carry them. So, and I think they come in packs of like 6 or 12, and you'd probably want to put 2 or 3 out in various locations where you think the mole's active to help increase the chances of them running into it. I have heard of individuals using half of a worm at a time. We want to make sure, right, the label's the law, and we want to follow the label. So if they're suggesting using a whole worm, you want to use the whole worm, because you can actually develop bait resistance or bait avoidance if they are, don't consume a lethal dose and survive. Then, so we want to make sure you follow those label instructions. The label is the law.
That's right. And those are good points to make out. But in order for this to be very successful, like you said, you need to go ahead and the tunnels that you're seeing in your yard, go ahead and tap those down first. Do we need to do that at night? Because it seems like moles are more active during the day, or does it matter?
Being fossorial, right? They don't necessarily even know the time of day. Often in the summer, though, like the soil heats up and kind of changes temperature. I don't think there would really matter as much. I would probably check them in the morning, just because that way nothing else kind of gets out there and starts screwing with it. But I push mine down whenever I'm outside when I'm dealing with moles. I just I'm walking in the lawn, there's a tunnel, there's another tunnel. All right, I'll go step on them. Then I'll just come back the next day. I don't know if it really matters the time of day. It's one of the few wildlife species that's not going to be active, or concerns relative to activity in daylight.
Okay, so I know we talked about moles and some of the controls, but just to kind of mention some of the other pests that can be a common problem for us in the home lawn area, how can we distinguish between, like you mentioned, the voles, and I know I just had a recent call about the chipmunks that I had to call you about. So, and even the skunks, and you can leave the armadillo for last if you want to.
So voles with a V are one of the other ones that we commonly see, especially in suburban urban landscaping issues. We have a whole different issue with them in row crop, but there are ones that can really cause a lot of problems in turf and gardens. And the indicators that we use for them is they will create fairly extensive runways where they will bounce from one hole to another hole. So you'll see basically these pathways that develop in the grass, or especially under turf that's recently placed, And along with those runways, you'll see a whole bunch of about golf ball, ping pong sized holes, which are their entrances to the den and the underground tunnels that they use. So the size of the hole is the important part here when we start talking about voles versus, say, chipmunks, or even larger things like armadillos and skunks. So the ping pong size, golf ball size hole is going to be a vole. If you go up a little bigger to about racquetball size, tennis ball size, then we start getting into things like chipmunks. And that is important in terms of management because one of the easiest ways to manage both of those species at small scales, when we talk about lawns and landscaping, because that is a small scale relative to things like a 100-acre soybean field, which is my other group that I talk to about voles a lot, is you have the option that's relatively quick and a little bit time intensive, but quick and efficient and relatively conservation safe, is you use basically mouse traps, or in the matter of chipmunks, mouse trap isn't big enough, so you have to use a rat trap. And those are the snap traps that you see that are made out of wood and have that nice metal bar and a spring. You can use those in your lawn. You can cover them up with basically a half of a shoebox and cut some holes in the bottom so that they can run through and find the trap. And you want to place those in areas that you see those tunnels and activity, the runways, bait them with peanut butter and oats, and basically run those traps, have them going every day, make sure they're covered, because if they're not covered, you could get birds in them. And that's why that coverage is important. And you trap until you don't catch any animals for 3 straight days. If you have a large area, say, 15, 25 feet wide of voles, because they get in really high densities, you may want to run a couple traps at a time to help decrease that amount of effort over in the course of days. Chipmunks don't get that high in density. So usually it's only a couple days of trapping to get rid of them. But if you misidentify, the chipmunk most likely is going to get snapped with that mouse trap and learn to avoid the trap. So you definitely want to try to go larger with them if you think it's a chipmunk. If it's a vole and they try to consume it on a rat-sized trap, it'll either catch them and efficiently, humanely dispatch them, or that you will keep missing because they're too small. So it's almost better to err on the side of larger than smaller. That way, if it's a chipmunk, you have the correct size trap. If it's a vole, then there's no negative back learning that occurs, and you're good to go.
That's good. I'm glad you explained the differences there, especially maybe being a little bit bigger than a little bit smaller.
And then the completely different one that I don't want to overlook here, and I forgot to mention it because I actually was walking into my office this morning and I saw the little holes that were all over the new mulch that was put down. Is skunks will do a lot of digging in lawns, but the other one that does digging in lawns are squirrels. And often what you'll see is they'll dig about 2 inches into the ground. They might be golf ball size around, right? Squirrels, if they're, in the process of caching seeds or nuts, will then cover that back up, right? So that other folks can't find it. Skunks are doing it while they're looking for grubs. So once they dig that hole, find the grub, they're moving on and creating another hole. They're not going to backfill it. However, squirrels now, and a lot of times they're not doing a whole lot of caching of nuts. They may be looking for those previously cached food. You'll see them dig up something and then they're not going to fill that back in. So often with squirrels, you'll see a bunch of holes in one little spot and then they'll move a couple feet and a bunch of holes. Whereas skunks, it'll be either a lot of holes if you have a lot of grubs in your lawn, or they'll just be like a line as they walk through your lawn. It won't be like sporadic, clumping.
I like that you told us the differences there, because I don't know if I knew really the difference between a skunk and then also a squirrel, that they cover it back up. We have several at my house that seems like they like to travel the branches of the trees, because we do have some taller birch and then, some maple that seem that they like to travel on. What are some common mistakes that you feel like homeowners make when trying to manage some of these lawn pests that we could maybe try to avoid? I think you mentioned one right off the bat is make sure you identify it correctly, but maybe you've noticed some other mistakes that we can kind of stay away from.
I think one of the biggest mistakes in general is the assumption that you can permanently solve the problem. That's really, really hard to do. It's not impossible, but it's 99% you are going to have them back again. So understand that what you're doing is either trying to lessen or temporarily solve an issue. And that kind of comes around to the idea of setting reasonable goals and outcomes for what you're trying to solve. The second is, we talked a little bit about the size of traps and make sure you pick the right trap for the right animal. And that's really important. And that holds true across all wildlife damage management. You want to make sure you're using the right tool to solve the problem that you have. The other ones that I think are common, often we used to, or some folks would recommend, like, oh, treat the grubs in your yard. That'll get rid of the mole issue. That's what they're eating. Well, often when you treat the grubs, you increase your worm numbers, and they're also eating those. So, you're kind of just picking one food option over another. And a lot of those, I will say from the conservation side, a lot of those grubs, and what ends up happening when you treat for grubs is you kill a lot of beneficial insects as well. So in a way, it doesn't gain anything because you're not solving the potential for moles being in your yard. That's one of them. Trying the mole traps and having difficulty in terms of catching the mole is a pretty common one, which is why we recommend those baits. And then I always try to make sure people, and this kind of goes along with the lines of like temporary solutions, is the more you can try to tolerate of wildlife and kind of come to terms with the fact that you may have some problems, the better off you're going to be stress-wise. And try to focus. If you have some specific plants you really like, try to focus within a landscape area, right, in your garden that you can really kind of defend and try to propagate those plants that you really don't want altered by wildlife in those locations. That is very hard for some people sometimes, and I get that. I will let you know that I have, a PhD in wildlife, and I also despise chipmunks. I've been trying to get some sunflowers going, and, that's not working. So it's okay. I will figure it out. And I generally basically move to a different part of my lawn or landscaping and usually a little further away from rocky outcroppings because chipmunks like those, and have a little bit of success. So I'm not going to punish the chipmunk for doing what he's supposed to be doing in terms of trying to survive. But I also understand people have priorities, and that's okay. Just make sure that you're trying to address the problem in the right way. And it's not affecting what we call non-target species.
That's all really good advice. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more here at the end of the show about the armadillos. So I know that there's probably new stuff coming out about armadillos, but what should we know about that? Especially because I know a lot of people that listen to the podcast, they're all in Kentucky. So what should we know about them?
So armadillos are a really funny animal. They basically clone themselves in some ways, right? So they have 4 young every time, and those 4 young are exactly identical to each other. They're quadruplets every time they have quadruplets. They have horrible eyesight. They have a good sense of smell. They're, for the most part, insectivores. Their dentition is such that they don't have the front incisors and canines. And they have long nails and claws to do a lot of digging. Their predatory response is to jump straight up in the air because they can't see real well. And when they get startled, they jump because that would allow them to basically, if it was a coyote or where they're from, which is South America and Central America, cats, bobcats, mountain lions, jaguars, that can penetrate that shell would try to pounce on them. So if they jump up, they would increase their chances of being missed. Doesn't work so well with cars, as they would jump right into the bumper. And, we see them a lot as roadkill. They're kind of a very difficult animal to deal with in the damage side of things because they randomly move around, dig holes in weird places that don't make sense. They're not necessarily looking for specific features. They dig a lot of holes very quickly as they are foraging, which is a problem. And if you try to trap them, they don't respond to bait real well. So you can't throw a pile of, some kind of lure in the back of a cage. They'll never go in unless they're just randomly walking it. So they're not attracted to a trap like, say a groundhog or a raccoon would be. So in order to be efficient at catching them, you have to actually set up what's called a drift fence, where you build a barrier that they walk into and then they follow it and they'll literally walk into the trap at the edge of the barrier. That's how you effectively catch them. So they're hard, and we're going to see more and more of them as, our temperatures are increasing. They're kind of moving up as our climate has changed a little bit. They're able to tolerate the winters further and further north. And they're going to be increasing in frequency despite the fact that, they jump into cars all the time. Their survival is pretty high and their population is growing. They're ones that I don't think you have to worry about getting into your garden and consuming your garden, but they could get into your garden and dig a bunch of holes for no reason at all, other than there's probably fresh dirt and a lot of worms. So they're going to be a challenge moving forward. I would say not necessarily a common one in the next 10 years, but definitely increasing in prevalence. There is some human health concerns in terms of the fact that they've been known to carry leprosy. We have a project that I was literally out trying to find roadkill armadillos the last 2 days in Western Kentucky because we have a student here with Dr. Cox that is looking at trying to calculate the prevalence rate of leprosy in our armadillos in the state of Kentucky. So more information to come there, but it has been known to potentially spread to humans, especially for folks that were consuming them, which is related a lot more to nutritional issues and the food availability. So they're going to be a fun one for me and you in the future.
Well, I appreciate the update on the armadillos. And like you said, I'll be watching for more information coming out probably a little bit later. I do have a quick question. I know we've covered several common pests of the lawn. We mentioned voles and moles, and then we also mentioned skunks and then chipmunks and a lot of, like you said, even the armadillos. But does the university have any great publications that might be good follow-ups if anybody has further questions about any of the ones that we might have covered today?
Sure. We definitely have several publications related to all of these culprits. We have a relatively new vole publication that has come out that kind of addresses it across multiple scales from rural agriculture to lawns and landscaping. We're in the process of updating the mole one. And there's a great video that Kansas State Extension wildlife folks have put out about mole control about a month ago that walks folks through how to set a lot of those traps so they're a little more efficient about it. So that's a great resource as well. And then we have hopefully in the very near future, a armadillo pub coming out, as well as updating the chipmunk control. We also have the squirrel publication on how to deal with tree squirrels. So there's definitely a lot of resources available, whether that be at your local county extension office, or you can go to our forestry and natural resources extension page and find them there under our wildlife publications tab.
You all have a Facebook page as well, is that right?
It is intermittently active.
Okay. So maybe check out the publications then. Yes.
Yeah, the publication page and the website is probably the best course of action in terms of finding most up-to-date activities. And then on occasion, as you have a podcast, we also have our From the Woods Today show through the Forestry and Natural Resource Extension folks. And often we talk about wildlife damage management and control. And there's been some episodes available that has a whole bunch of information relative to some of those critters and dealing with them on that site.
Perfect. Well, we'll have to link that down in our show notes for this episode. So make sure you visit on the blog for that information. Dr. Matt Springer, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast today. I really enjoyed it and learned a lot at the same time. So I hope we can have you back again in the future.
Anytime, as long as I can figure out how to get my schedule to open up for you. But thanks for having me, Kristin. This has been great. And if anyone has any other questions outside of reaching out to your local county extension office, you can also contact me at mattspringer@uky.edu, and I'm happy to try to help you from there.
That'll be great. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to the Sunshine Gardening Podcast. A special thank you to Dr. Matthew Springer for being our guest on the show today. We hope that you found today's episode informative and learned valuable tips on keeping your garden free from pesky critters like moles and voles. Remember, a healthy garden starts with effective pest control. If you want to check out the publications mentioned by Dr. Springer in today's episode, see the show notes for episode 32. You can find the show notes by visiting the blog at warrencountyagriculture.com. Now, if you enjoyed today's episode, we would greatly appreciate it if you would leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your reviews help us reach more people and grow our community. Additionally, we would love to hear from you if you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions for future episodes. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button to our podcast for more gardening insights, and join us next time as we explore new ways to cultivate the garden of your dreams. Until then, happy gardening.
Thanks for listening to the Sunshine Gardening Podcast with Kristin Hildabrand. If you enjoyed today's content, make sure to hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts to catch future segments of the Sunshine Gardening Podcast. Gardeners, keep on digging and learning more about gardening so the sun shines brighter over your Kentucky garden. The Sunshine Gardening Podcasts with Kristin Hildabrand is a production of the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Service.